Hello everyone and welcome to the 30-Minute Gospel. My name is Chris and I'll be your host as we open and study the Bible together. I'll be reading from the King James Version, but you can feel free to read whichever translation that best suits you. I would just recommend that you have a version that does not delete verses from God's holy word. Each video will be a biblical teaching of 30 minutes or less. My material is completely 100% free, so you can share these videos with family members, co-workers, friends, or anyone you know who either needs to hear the Word of God or wants to study it in a casual setting. The gospel is free to all, so I will not accept any donations, gifts, or beg viewers for money. Please give to your local church or Christian organization of your choosing. You can reach out to me with questions or comments at 30minutegospel@gmail.com, but please keep your message respectful and cordial. Well, welcome again, everybody, to another episode of the 30-Minute Gospel. We've been on a subject talking about the Christian church and the nation of Israel and how we're supposed to respond to that to this day, okay? And that's what we have been discussing. Should we support them? Should we not support them? Are we the new Israel? We're answering all these questions, but we've been kind of going slowly through their history, things that have happened, these sorts of things, okay? All right, so as we left off, that God had promised, when we left off, that God had promised to bring them back into their land, which they have done. Isaiah 66:8 talks about, shall a nation be born in a day? That was the nation of Israel. May 14th, 1948. That prophecy was fulfilled. Okay? Amos 9:14 through 15 says they will never be pulled out of their land again. Okay? Well, we know that couldn't refer to when they came back from Babylon. So it must be referring to this time because we know the end times are coming soon. We can sense it, that things are starting to fulfill. And I don't believe they will be pulled out again until then, because they are the fig tree that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24. They are the fig tree in bloom, and know that one generation will not pass till all these things are fulfilled that Jesus spoke of, which will happen. Okay, the fig tree will be in bloom again. That's the nation of Israel. Okay, the Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones. Okay, we talked about that. That is an allegory of the nation of Israel coming out from seeming death. They're seeming like their death. He said he's going to pull them from the four winds, the four corners of the earth. That's what you've seen in what they call aliyahs. These people, the Jewish people, are coming from all different parts of the world back to the land. Okay. So, but we have to understand something too, that Genesis, as I said, the Genesis 12:3 curse works. Okay, that curse works. God said, I will bless those that bless thee, and I will curse those that curse thee, talking about Abraham. Okay, that is true. The nations that have blessed Israel have been blessed. The nations that have cursed Israel, come against them, have been cursed. God is going to fulfill that. That curse is just like the curse on the earth. The curse on the earth is still here. That curse is still in effect. The Galatians chapter 1 talks about Paul talks about if any man preach another gospel, let him be accursed. Okay, so that curse is still; those curses are still there. So this curse, Genesis 12:3, God has not gotten rid of. Okay, some may argue, well, it was done away with with Jesus on the cross. Jesus got rid of the curse of the law, according to Galatians 3:13, not curses. This curse was before the curse of the law, and you've seen that. And Obadiah expands upon this. Obadiah is one chapter long. Okay, so if you go to the book of Obadiah, I want y'all to see this. Obadiah is, you think he's right before Jonah. He's right after Amos, but before Jonah. And Obadiah 15, if you turn to the book of Obadiah, verse 15 says, for the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. That's what it's talking about. It's kind of a greater emphasis on that curse. Okay? It's a greater emphasis on that curse of Genesis 12:3. If you come against them, it will return on your own head. And you're going to see this. It may not always happen the way that it does, but there's some similarities in it. Okay? I'm going to go through, because one of the things that I got my master's degree in was history. We're going to discuss this because you're going to see this. Okay? All right, in history. So this will be a little bit of a history lesson for y'all. Okay, a little bit of a history lesson. But the first nation that ever came up against the nation of Israel was the Egyptian nation. Okay, if you remember from the stories in Genesis, Joseph, came to power there. The Pharaoh invited because of the famine, invited all of the Israelites that under Jacob, there were 70 in all, they all came and stayed in the land of Goshen, where they prospered during the famine, and where Joseph and the Pharaoh took care of them. How long they were there before they were enslaved, I don't know. Okay, I don't know how long that Pharaoh lived. People back then lived long lives, so the Pharaoh that knew Joseph may have lived 120 years. I don't know. Maybe maybe his son knew him, and so his son kept them. Okay, when did they become slaves? The Bible doesn't really say. It just says that there's a Pharaoh that arose that knew not Joseph. Okay, and they enslaved the Israelites. Okay. So the Israelites were there enslaved. Their cry went up to God. God sent them Moses. But the Pharaoh and the nation of Egypt, okay, refused to let him go. Okay? Well, before even Moses came, what did they do because they were afraid that their numbers were getting too big and they were growing to about 2 million people. They were afraid these people are going to take over for us. So what are we going to do? We're going to drown all of the firstborn sons in the Nile River. You're going to do that. Okay? And it says God looked after them, but that was the plan. They were going to try to drown all of the newborns, Moses being one of them. The famous story, his mother puts him in a basket. He goes down, the Pharaoh's daughter finds him, and he's raised in royalty. Okay? He's kind of the opposite of Joseph. Joseph started in poverty in the prison and then made his way up to the castle, as you would say, where Moses did the opposite. Moses was raised in the castle and then went away to poverty being a shepherd. He did the opposite. Okay? Now, a lot of people wonder, I've always said, why were the Jews enslaved by the Egyptians? Why did God allow that to happen? My belief is that they were enslaved by the Egyptians because of the sins of the fathers. The fathers sold their brother into slavery. Okay, and he had to go down to Egypt. So what happened when they were in Egypt? They became slaves. The sins of the fathers play out to the third and fourth generation, as it says. And so they were enslaved at that point. Because what? Reuben, Judah, Gad, Dan, all of them, Zebulun, all of them sold Joseph into slavery. So therefore, now that they're down there, they become slaves. Okay, it's unfortunate they had to pay for the sins of their own brethren, but their forefathers. But that's what happens. It happens a lot for people. Okay, so they're down there. Moses comes in. The Egyptians come against them. Okay, they refuse to let him go and everything else. So God brings the plagues, and of course the final plague that he brings upon the Egyptians is what? The death of the firstborn son. Why? Because what you do to them, it will be brought back on your own head. They tried to take out the firstborn sons of the Israelites 40 years earlier, so now God is bringing it back on them. So all the Egyptians, the death angel goes through and kills all the firstborn children in Egypt. Okay, but it doesn't end there. So when the Jews were let go, when the Israelites were let go by the Pharaoh, they were leaving. They come to the Red Sea. The Pharaoh has a change of heart, and he decides he wants to get them back. So he goes over there, and you know the famous story of where the Red Sea is parted. The Israelites cross over on dry ground, and then the Egyptians try to come in and follow them. And when the last Israelite crosses, the sea closes over the Egyptians and drowns them all. Why? because what you do to them will be brought back on your own head. They tried to drown the firstborn child in the Nile River. That's what he wanted them to do. So what did God do in return to the Egyptians? He killed the firstborn sons in Egypt, and then he had drowned the Egyptians. Okay? Do you see that? Why? Because I will bless those that bless thee, and I will curse those that curse thee. Okay? And that's what happened. The Assyrians came in. Okay? They conquered they conquered the 12 areas of called northern Israel, which was the kingdom of Israel. There was the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah at that point, because Judah and the nation of Israel had been separated with the Rehoboam-Jeroboam controversy. Okay, they had been separated up. So the 10 northern tribes had been conquered by Nineveh because of their pagan practices. And if you know anything about that, it's once Jeroboam left, they set up the city of Samaria. That's where you hear the term the Good Samaritan. The Jews were up there. They were worshiping pagan idols. They weren't coming down to the temple, which was in Jerusalem, which was in the territory of Judah. They weren't doing that. They were doing all their pagan worship up there. None of the kings that are listed in First and Second Kings or First and Second First and Second Kings. None of the kings of Israel are good kings. Not a single one of them. They're all wicked. Ahab was one. Okay? And they had prophets that spoke to them up there. Elijah, Elisha, some of those other prophets spoke to them. Okay? So the Assyrians conquered them and took most of them back. Okay? Not all of them. Some of the members of those tribes, see, a lot of people say there are the 10 lost tribes. No, there were members of those tribes who did make their way down to Jerusalem and Judah and Benjamin. Okay, they were the ones that still had a heart for God. Okay, how do we know this? Because it talks about that in the New Testament. I think the lady's name. It's mentioned in Luke when they're bringing the baby Jesus to the temple. And they're bringing Jesus to the temple, and he's a little kid, maybe a baby or a little kid at that point. And I think the prophetess' name was Anna, and it says she was of the tribe of Asher, I think. It's either Asher or Simeon. So there were people from those tribes that were still there, and they know what tribe they came from. Okay? So they did have people from those tribes. And it's not all 10, because there were Levites still. Okay? So... But anyway, getting back to that, the Assyrians conquered, okay, and so Jonah is sent to the city of Nineveh. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, to warn them. And of course, I have a study on that if you've seen the video. The Assyrians, the people of Nineveh repent, so God doesn't bring judgment on them, but He eventually does bring judgment on them by the Babylonians. Okay, and God promised that they would be eradicated and never be found again, and they aren't. They said the city of Nineveh will lie in a waste. It'll be a wasteland, and that's exactly what happened to them. Okay, so they came against the Jewish people. That's what happened to them. The Babylonians came against the Jewish people as a punishment for their disobedience to God, not listening to the prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, not listening to any of those prophets who told them not to do things. And their pagan worships, and of course the description of this is written about in the destruction of Jerusalem is written about by Jeremiah in 2 chapters in the end of 2 Chronicles, at the end of 2 Kings. It's kind of written about extensively so people understand what's going on with that, okay, of what they did. The Babylonians bring them back, okay. They conquer the city of Jerusalem and burn it down. Well, eventually Babylon, the nation of Babylon is going to be destroyed as well, okay. They're going to go down. They're going to go down swiftly too. Okay, the Babylonians are going to be taken over by the Persian Empire, Okay, the Persians are what is modern day Iran. Now, the people in Iran today are not the Persians of that time. What's in Iran now are Arabic people. But the Persia came in and destroyed Babylon. And God says in Isaiah and Ezekiel, he says in Isaiah and Jeremiah, he says that Babylon the city of Babylon will be a desert wasteland, and it will never be rebuilt. And that city was destroyed somewhere in the 500 BC, and that city has not been rebuilt. Alexander stayed there. Some people did, but the city eventually was destroyed. It never was the big city it was again, and it was destroyed, and it's never been rebuilt as God promised. That is proof of God's word. There's several cities that he talks about. Memphis will be destroyed and never be inhabited again in Egypt, and it's been destroyed and nobody lives there. Okay? And the city of Tyre is the same thing. Now, it's not talking about the coastland of Tyre. It's talking about the rock where the city was. The rock where the city is, nothing's built there. It's just ruins. Okay, they had a rock fortress in there, and it's in ruins. Okay, just like God said. But God said Babylon will not be rebuilt. It hasn't been. People have tried to rebuild it. Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild it. And God stopped him with the Iraq invasion by the United States in March of 2003. Saddam Hussein was stopped, and nobody's tried to rebuild it since. Because it's not going to be rebuilt. God said it won't. He'll make sure of that. Okay, so the Babylonians are destroyed. Nobody knows what happened to them. Then the Greeks come in. The Greeks have control of the Jewish people for a little bit, but what happened was the guy Epiphanes, I can't remember, Aristarchus or something, Epiphanes or something, Aristarchus I think is his first name. But yeah, he became the ruler, and he famously went into the temple and slaughtered a pig on there, okay, because the Jews were refusing to pay a tax, okay. So he went in there and slaughtered a pig on the altar, and some have said that was the immediate fulfillment. Some people have argued that was the abomination of desolation that's spoken of by Daniel in Daniel chapter 9. But the problem with that is that Jesus said, when you see that the abomination of desolation spoken of in the book by Daniel. Okay, so this happened like 200 years before Jesus was born. Okay, so therefore there must be a future abomination of desolation. That means the third temple is going to be rebuilt. That's where we get the end times and all of what we're talking about with that. Okay, so he does that. The Jews revolt. That's what they're called. It's called the Maccabean Revolt. Okay, and so what happens is I think this guy's name is Judah Maccabee or something like that. And Maccabee means the hammer or something like that. And so what the Jewish people did was the Greeks and them kind of get into a little bit of a war. When the Jews were trying to read the Torah, if the Greeks came by to prevent them from reading from the Torah, the Jews would take the scriptures and put them down and hide them, and then pull out a little dreidel and play it. The little dreidel, that's where you get it from, because that's what this holiday is going to be. It's Hanukkah is created out of this. Because the Jews are eventually going to get hold again of the temple, okay, but they only have enough oil to burn for one night. It's the usual supply for one night, but God miraculously does it for 8 straight nights. That's where you get 8 nights of Hanukkah, because the menorah in the temple is only 7 arms on it. But the menorah that the Jews do during Hanukkah has 9. Okay, they have 8 in the center one. Okay, those 8 represent the 8 nights that God miraculously kept the oil burning. Okay, that's where Hanukkah comes. The festival, the festival of lights, as they call it. Jesus celebrated the festival of lights in John 10. So he was celebrating Hanukkah. It was a known holiday back then, a Jewish holiday in remembrance to what God had miraculously done. Now, some people they'll call that period between Malachi and the book of Matthew. They'll say that's like the dark period, like God didn't speak. It was like the silent period. Well, it's true, God didn't speak verbally to any prophet, but what God did do was it doesn't mean the miraculous things were not happening during that time. And Hanukkah is an example of that. God was still speaking during that. He may not have verbally spoke, but he spoke. Okay? So the Jews got back the temple, and so what ended up happening was the Greeks were conquered by the Romans and kind of absorbed into the Romans. And the Greek Empire, the Greeks never had their empire again, really. And Greece is still around today, but it's never been the country that it once was. A lot of what their old stuff is in ruins today. Really, we only remember them for the Olympic Games a lot of times. But they lost that. So that's where Hanukkah comes from. Now, the Roman Empire comes in and controls them. And initially, the Roman Empire is okay with the Jewish people. Okay? They're initially okay. They kind of let them do things that they want to do. And the Jewish people, had to allow them to put Herod on the throne. And Herod was an Edomite. He wasn't even a Jew. He was like a converted Jew. He was a descendant of Esau. He's the last known descendant of Esau that we have on record. Not to say there weren't ones after him, but he's the last one that we have a historical record of. But the Roman Empire, eventually what happens there is, of course, the Jews refuse to pay a tax because they want to build a temple to Jupiter, I think it was, in the land of Israel, and they refuse to pay the tax, or somewhere. I can't remember where it was. Okay? So they refused to pay the tax. So in response to that, what happened was the Roman Emperor Vespasian. Okay? Vespasian is mostly known for starting the construction of the Colosseum. Okay, some of y'all know the Colosseum, very famous ruins in Rome. But he sends his son Titus down. Okay, this is not the Titus that is mentioned, that is in the book of, that's the book of Titus. That's a different Titus. This is different. This Titus was the Roman general. His father was Vespasian. He sent him down there to basically conquer the Jews. Okay, so what Titus does is Titus surrounds the city of Jerusalem and starves them out for a year. Okay? The Jewish people revolted against them. They refused to pay the tax. They revolted in 66 AD. By 69, I think it was, Titus had gone down there and he did a complete encampment around the city, and he starved the city out. Okay. Titus very famously goes into the city in 70 AD. They bust down the walls. They burn, I think, about half the city down. They went into the temple and took out all of the stuff in there and burned the temple down to the ground. Okay? And they took everything back to Rome and conquered the Jewish people. Their last stand was at Masada. Some of y'all have heard that story, the mountain fortress where they made their last stand, but there was like a couple of them left, and they drew lots to commit suicide and all of this kind of thing, and have one killed and everything. But Titus kind of took that over. It took them over, okay, and kind of did everything against them. The only thing left of the old temple on the Temple Mount is what's called the Wailing Wall. That's the only thing left of it. And in the Wailing Wall, you can still see the burn marks from where Titus had set it on fire. They have not they have not left it, they have not moved it, and also the stones that were destroyed are still lying in ruin on the city. Nobody's ever moved them. Okay? Some of the stones that were destroyed from the temple. Okay? And so he goes back, he takes it all that, and in response to that, to congratulate him basically for his victory, the Roman government builds what's known as the Arch of Titus. Okay, they used to construct arches, as a way to recognize a triumph. Okay, and this recognized Titus's triumph of Jerusalem. They even have pictures on the side of it with them taking the menorah out and everything, and the destruction of the temple and all of this. That's what they built for him. Okay, so about a year or two, couple years later, Vespasian dies and Titus takes over. Okay, ironically, what ends up happening is not long after Titus takes over, a fire breaks out in the city of Rome. It burns down half the city. And one of the major things that is burned down is the temple to Jupiter. If you know anything, Jupiter is the Roman word for Zeus. Zeus was the main god of the polytheistic world in the Greek and the Roman culture. So the major temple to their number one god gets burned to the ground. When Titus was about to die, they asked him, they said, he very famously said his last words were, "I have made but one mistake." I think he knows what that one mistake is. That one mistake was challenging the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He burned down the temple, so God in return burned down their temple. He set his city on fire. He set God's city on fire, so God set his city on fire. But there's actually more to this story. But I can't complete that right now because we're almost out of time. So I'll leave it there. I'll leave it on a little cliffhanger of what's going to happen with the city of Rome. But I think Titus knew his one mistake. I think he did. He was well aware of that one mistake. Anyway, I thank you all for tuning in again. Okay. I would always encourage you to like the video and also subscribe to my YouTube channel. This video is also available on Rumble. I have a Rumble channel. I have a Facebook page. It's called 30 Minute Gospel with Chris. You can like and follow that. And I would recommend that you share this video with anyone that you know that needs it. Anyone that you know may like it. It's completely free. The message is, I also have one on there. It's called the Gospel Message. If you have a family or a family member, coworker, someone that needs the gospel, please, I would recommend that you share that with them. I also have an email if you would like to reach me. It's 30minutegospel@gmail.com. That 30 is a 30. It's available in the description of this video and also on my YouTube channel. Okay, but I always say, if you're going to write me something, please nothing vile or rude or vulgar. I'm not going to read it. Okay, I'm not going to waste my time reading it. Okay, all right. Well, I thank you again, everybody, and I will leave you with this. Remember, just as Theodore Roosevelt once said, a thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. God bless you all.